So there's a lot of types of divination out there. You have astrology, where you read these complicated charts that note the positions of planets and stars at specific times. Now, we just have these horoscopes in the newspaper. Those are just telling your sun sign. When you have astrology done, there's your sun sign, there's your moon sign, there's ascendant stars, there's descendant stars, there's all sorts of complicated, intricate systems. Our system of astrology as we know it now is derived from ancient Greece. Now, in India, there's also something called Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology is actually Greek astrology. The Greeks, when they went to India, brought their astrological systems. But Indians, being Indians, looked at it and went, that's pretty cool. We can make this way more complicated. So they really expanded out the mathematics of it. And I find when consulting a Vedic astrologer versus someone trained in Western astrology, just the complexity is completely just off the chain for the Indian side of things. Now, there's also these things called portents. A portent is like an ill sign, like a sign that something bad is going to happen. Now, I think about one text I like to read called the Arthashastra, which is a Sanskrit text, and it talks about seeing comets or eclipses, and it describes different, star shifts that can be portents. They have an ill sign. They tell you something bad is going to happen in the future based on that sign. You've heard someone say maybe, well, that's portentous, as in you see something that augurs something bad might happen in the future. Then there's all sorts of different types of what I call physiognomy. So physiognomy is doing divination based on someone's physical structure, like hand reading. A lot of Hindus describe having your future written on your forehead, to the point I have a friend who would always joke with me. I'd say, so I'll see you next week. And he'd go like this. And that was his way of saying, if it's written on my forehead, or if I would say, oh, I hope this happens, he would go like that. And that always meant if it's written on my forehead. The idea is that the 6th day after a child is born, the goddess Shashti, which means 6, comes by and actually inscribes the future in the forehead of the child. It's kind of great. Anyway, so karma on the forehead, handwriting analysis, I would put on this as well as a type of physiognomy. And of course, hand reading, which I've seen done really well and done really poorly. One time I was seeing this astrologer in India, and he gave me a very ambivalent, ambiguous reading. And what he was doing is he was looking for tridents in my hand, so prongs that looked like a pitchfork. He would find them on my hand and then note where they were, and he was devoted to the god Shiva, who carries a trident, not Poseidon, Shiva. And he would look at how those tridents interacted. And then he would do the same thing with the lines on my face. And I realized later that's why he was so interested in my forehead, because it's all right there. It's all right there on your forehead. What about dreams? So throughout time, we see a little bit of this amongst the Azandi. There's an appendix in the book on dream interpretation. So dreams traditionally were thought to tell the future, and you had to interpret the symbols in them. And they have whole manuals on this. It's called oniromancy, so dream prognostication. There are books of repeated symbols and their interpretations. We find this going back to the classical ancient world, find them in India as well. So then there's also another thing where they talk about an active dream magic. And in that, what you would do is you would put yourself into a state where you would want a vision and then maybe sleep in a very specific place. And then hopefully the dreams would give the vision or the interpretation of what would come. There are other kind of crazy, well, they're not crazy. There are other very traditional versions of divination, like the tarot that I showed you before, and I'll talk more about that soon. The I Ching is an ancient Chinese system where you throw coins, and based on the fall of the coins, you'll develop a diagram or a hexagram, and from that hexagram, you'll interpret from there. It's one of the oldest forms of divination. Or the witch's pendulum. I think I had one right here. Yeah, there's a witch's pendulum. So it's like this kind of heavy pendulum thing. And a person will hold it, and then they'll ask questions, usually yes or no. And you'll see, and it's weird, it really does happen. I think it has to do with the musculature and subtle micro movements of the hand. I do kind of buy that. That the pendulum will swing in one way, and it'll answer yes and no questions. So yes will often mean, depending on who is reading it, yes will be it does something that's the same. No means it suddenly starts going left and right or circular instead of back and forth. So the witch's pendulum. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Bible codes. This was a big deal when I was a teenager, and the idea is that you can go and look into the Christian and Hebrew Bibles and use specific ways of reading different syllables to find messages. Now, I did see someone effectively use the Bible code to predict the Chicago Bulls winning a championship one time. So does that mean God put that message in there? I don't know. I find it kind of silly. It's also weird in the Bible code because a lot of Protestants will use it, and they'll develop these intricate ciphers to interpret these Bible codes, but then they're only looking at it in English. I'm like, the thing was in Greek, and it was in Greek first, and then it was in Hebrew. So how can you really say that this system, but the hand of God works in crazy ways. Okay, so I like to think about divination as being prescriptive versus descriptive. So prognostication, telling forward of the future, versus elaborating the present and the past or the current state of the person who's asking the questions. Now, in 1450, we got this word prognostication in the Oxford English Dictionary, the action, practice, or fact of prognosticating, foreshowing, foretelling, predication, or prophecy, coming from a classical Latin prognosticatio, which is an action or fact of foretelling, prediction, or portent. All right, so it goes right back to Latin. We also have this word prognosis, which is like when a doctor tells you this is your prognosis. This is what we think will happen to you. So prognostication and prognosis are connected words.